The road to the women's suffrage amendment was a long and complicated one. In 1776, Abigail Adams famously called out the men of her age, declaring them tyrants and saying that women might, quote, foment a rebellion and would not be bound by laws in which they have no voice or representation. Reform-minded white women of the early 19th century discovered that they had very little impact on issues such as slavery, the education of women, temperance movement, or the care of the least fortunate in society without the right to vote. The Seneca Falls, New York Convention of 1848 marked the most well-known meeting in the early U.S. history that considered women's suffrage as a goal. Even many of the women in attendance were squeamish about advocating for something so radical. But the event's organizers, Elizabeth Stanton and Susan Anthony, brought their good friend Frederick Douglass to the stage, who roused the crowd with characteristic elegance and carried them alongside to the side of suffrage. The collective goal of many antebellum reformers, both black and white, were greater rights and liberties for everyone, regardless of race and sex. This included the end of slavery and a broader voting base that would include women and people of color. However, the debate over the 15th Amendment after the Civil War caused a rift in this lifting all boats type movement. Opposition to the 15th Amendment directly granted black men the vote, but not women. While some, like suffragists Lucy Stone and Frederick Douglass, saw the 15th Amendment as a good, though incomplete, step in the right direction, others, like Susan Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton, believed that granting formerly enslaved black men the vote before educated white women was something akin to a betrayal. Anthony and Stanton even appealed to the KKK to try to help them defeat the 15th Amendment, causing bitterness and a split in the suffrage movement in 1869. The two main suffrage movements that developed from this split eventually reunited 2 decades later into the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NAWSA, in 1890. Though these organizations did bring about positive changes, such as full voting rights for women in 6 Western states by 1911, and limited suffrage, usually for offices like school board, in many other states, the piecemeal approach was taxing, not to mention unjust, to women across the nation. And other failures were self-imposed. None of these major organizations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries welcomed black women on an equal basis with whites. State chapters, national meetings held in southern states, and even suffrage parades were segregated at the insistence of white leadership. But African American women, such as Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman, participated in their own suffrage and rights organizations, including the National Association of Colored Women. Though gaining the vote was a critical cause for these women, it was equally important to remove the voting barriers that their husbands, fathers, and sons faced, and that they would likewise face with the franchise, like discriminatory literacy tests, property requirements, and poll taxes, not to mention direct threats of violence. For black women, sex was not as much of a barrier to full rights as race, and the issue of race ultimately played heavily in the final debate over the application of the 19th Amendment.